Croc was developed by Argonaut Games and released in late 1997 on the PlayStation, Sega Saturn and PC. I'm going to be covering the fan-enhanced PC version as I believe it's the definitive way to play. Things kick off with an opening sequence of Croc being found as a baby by these cute, fluffy creatures known as gobbos. After a brief montage of Croc growing up alongside the gobbos, the antagonist Baron Dante appears and starts kidnapping everyone in the valley. King Rufus, the leader of the gobbos, quickly summons a magical bird to take Croc away and ensure his safety, before finally being taken himself. This intro establishes everything you need to know about the plot in a concise fashion, while also showcasing a lot of the game's personality. I particularly like the ending shot of King Rufus in his cell, as it gives you a solid image to keep in mind while playing. You're then placed onto the title screen, which can feature a number of different locations crafted specifically for this menu, which is a nice touch. The starting area introduces most of the main concepts you'll be interacting with, like collectibles, platforms, and enemies. There's no tutorials outside of the game design itself, so the player is free to interact with any of these basic elements and learn about them on their own. Down the well underneath the first gobbo, the player will find a small sub-area containing a simple platforming challenge involving some fire hazards and temporary platforms. These optional self-contained areas are common throughout the game and always contain worthwhile collectibles. Croc is controlled with what's usually referred to as tank controls. Holding up on the D-pad will move Croc forward, left and right will only turn Croc, and holding back will make him backpedal. L1 and R1 can be used to slightly shuffle left or right for better positioning, and it can even be used while running, giving you a little bit more control. There's also the extremely useful quick turn, allowing you to change direction instantly. This form of movement is usually a point of contention, especially for 3D platformers, but I believe this setup is completely valid. The more methodical approach has its place, and the level design is created with this particular control scheme in mind. While the controls are definitely unconventional by today's standards, I find that they work well, especially for an early 3D platformer, and they didn't cause me any issues other than the occasional ungraceful hiccup. Along with general movement, Croc can jump, ledge grab, hang under mesh ceilings, spin to attack, ground pound to break small objects, and also swim. Swimming can feel a bit awkward with how hard it is to make small adjustments, but it wasn't enough to ruin the water sections for me. The camera in the main stages is always locked to Croc's back, with 3 different heights that can be cycled through with the R2 button, allowing you to get a good view on any challenge throughout the game. In my experience, the camera worked well most of the time, with a few instances of it getting caught on some geometry for a brief second or two, but it was never during any platforming. The gems work in a similar fashion to rings from Sonic, which work well enough, although it does allow for sloppy play, as it's not hard to hold on to that one life-saving gem after taking damage. Sonic introduced the ring system as a band-aid solution for players getting blindsided by the high speed and small screen size, which isn't an issue in Croc, so I'm a bit confused as to why they went with this design choice. I think a more traditional limited HP system would have been a better fit. All main levels contain 6 gobbos and 5 coloured gems. The coloured gems open up access to the optional bonus room found at the end of every main level, which always contains the 6th gobbo. The gobbos open access to the secret levels, which contain puzzle pieces which are required to unlock the final world. An issue I have with the coloured gems is how they aren't immediately visible, as they look like normal gems before being collected. As every gem can potentially be a coloured one, you have to meander around following the sometimes poorly and arbitrarily placed gems just in case you miss one. If any mechanic was going to be lifted from another game, it should have been the altered coin colour for hidden red coins in Yoshi's Island. What makes this even more baffling is how this game was originally pitched to Nintendo as a 3D Yoshi game in the first place, so you'd think they would have connected the dots here. Levels are broken up into multiple main areas separated by doors, with the aforementioned sub-areas scattered throughout. As well as additional platforming challenges, these sub-areas can also contain minigames such as crate shuffling or having to chase down a moving target. The bonus rooms are similar, usually more focused on one kind of minigame or gimmick. Most of them are easy, but the minigames with the in-game buttons that you have to jump on always go on for far too long, and the split paths in the ghost races have the potential to be confusing for first-time players. In the secret levels, there's no collectibles other than the puzzle pieces themselves, which end the stage upon being collected, so I found myself just gunning it to the end as fast as possible during these. There's an unusual amount of space in these levels, with not much reason to go through most of it unless you're really hungry for some extra lives. There's 5 worlds in total. There's the Forest Island, Ice Island, Desert Island, Castle Island, and the final unlockable world, Crystal Island, which is a mix of all 4. While Croc isn't winning any awards for creative level themes, what we do have is presented well. The vast majority of the game is strictly platforming, and each world escalates for difficulty comfortably, requiring more precise jumps over the ever-increasing bottomless pits, which does get fairly challenging by the end. New elements are frequently introduced, such as slippery ice, darkness, and swimming. New platform types also appear throughout the game, such as the spinning gears, scrolling logs, and flipping spike blocks. World 4 in particular has a lot of unique elements with varying levels of success. The enemies, while being great visually, don't add much to the experience. There are some exceptions however, like the worms and ballistic mechs. The majority either patrol a small set path or stand stationary waiting for you to get in range so they can take a shot at you. The stomping Dantinis above the mesh ceilings also felt inconsistent for me. Most of the enemies can be taken out with a tail whip or ground pound, and there's no feeling of impact whatsoever, only amplifying their uselessness. A lot of them are unique to their location however, and the Dantinis follow the visual theme of the world they're in, which is a great detail that's also shared with the crates. Generally the gameplay is quite basic, but mastering the more difficult scenarios with a unique control scheme was enough to keep me entertained. A small percentage of the game can feel a bit slow with the amount of required ground pounding on crates in combination with a few too many instances of waiting for moving platforms. There's also some dead-end rooms that require you to backtrack a little after collecting the key or gobbo at the end, which does feel a bit like padding, although there's nothing too egregious. The majority of the gameplay still shines despite these minor issues. Visually the game looks fantastic, with its chunky polygons, strong colours and crisp pixelated textures. Forest Island looks pleasant and inviting, with the bright greens and frequent lava pools working as a striking contrast. Ice Island looks cold yet comforting, with these soft blues, bright white snow, and deep purple rocks slowly being consumed by ice. Desert Island feels appropriately dry, with the interior cave sections having the most distinct design yet, with the more radical colour change and bubbling swamp in place of lava. Castle Island does a good job conveying a sense of finality, with stained glass windows of Baron Dante and pictures of his family hung up near the doors. The drop into the dimly lit dungeon area is a highlight of the game for me. The swimming sections are some of my favourite when it comes to atmosphere due to the low visibility in combination with the fitting music and pleasant swimming sound effects. Croc's design has clear Yoshi inspiration, with enough uniqueness to make him stand out on his own. He's animated well, and his cute sound effects are still burned into my brain from when I first played this game on my original PlayStation. The soundtrack is stellar. The bar is set extremely high with the intro music, and each following track does an amazing job of setting the scene. Each boss fight comes at the end of its own stage, and like the secret levels, these stages contain no collectibles, so it's just a straight shot to the end. Each one has a short, enjoyable cutscene of Baron Dante transforming an innocent looking creature into a monster, which I like to think is directly inspired from Yoshi's Island. Unfortunately, the actual fights are the weakest part of the game. Nearly every fight involves baiting out an attack and hitting the boss when they're vulnerable after the move. Sometimes a ground pound is involved, sometimes they use additional attacks later in the fight, but it all comes down to the same process every time. The final hit also feels extremely anticlimactic, as the boss will instantly freeze in place, which really makes them feel unfinished. Only 2 of them involve any platforming whatsoever, and it's hardly anything involving. Considering this is a platformer with a large focus on bare bones platforming, it's a shame they didn't design the bosses to test your control over Croc that you've built up throughout the game. As it stands, they feel rather unnecessary. Fortunately, they aren't that offensive overall, as most of them are easy, short, and also come paired with a great song. Along with the intro cutscenes, there's also an outro showing the boss being reverted back to normal and going about their business as Croc watches in awe. If it wasn't for these positives, I'd be writing the bosses off completely, but as it stands, it's just the actual fights themselves that are disappointing. Once King Rufus is saved, the Gobbos raise a statue for Croc and have a cute dance party to celebrate. I can't ask for much more. I think Croc is a great game. The simple yet expressive presentation and memorable music have kept the game alive in my mind since childhood, and I've only learned to appreciate the game more as I've gotten older. Despite a few minor pacing issues and the weak boss fights, the overall experience still manages to feel focused. While probably not the intention at the time, the now novel control scheme is one of the defining characteristics of the game, and I think it's worth embracing. At the end of the day, it's nice to play something a bit different.